Have you guys noticed anything weird going on?
You mean weird for a world where we fight mad scientists and witches while you review bad TV shows? Yes, besides that.
Just something feels off, like things are changing around us for some reason.
Well, I guess we can just carry on. Welcome to TV Trash. It's time for another history lesson in what seems to be our ongoing series, When Did Cartoons Go to Crap? Many of us Gen Xers and Millennials grew up watching classic cartoon shorts from the likes of Warner Brothers and Disney on television. But it would not be until later in our years that many of us learned these cartoons were originally made for distribution in movie theaters. Studios like Warner and MGM had their own animation departments, while Paramount and later RKO Radio Pictures outsourced the making of cartoon shorts to Walt Disney's then fledgling independent studio. However, due to a number of changes by the 50s and 60s, mainly the fall of the infamous studio system and the advent of television, many of the major studios had to massively cut costs or in some cases completely folded. And that resulted in animation no longer being a priority for those big distributors. RKO Radio Pictures completely closed up shop, resulting in Disney distributing its own cartoons through the Buena Vista Pictures brand. While MGM and Warner shut down their own animation departments, forcing the major cartoon creators to form their own studios. We've already discussed many times what all Bill Hanna and Joe Barbera did after MGM let them go, but then there's what the other major cartoon creators did. Even after shuttering the animation studio, Warner still decided to distribute its well-known Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoon shorts just by having other people do the actual work. In 1964, they contracted production of new Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies shorts to the studio formed by David DePatie and longtime Warner Animation producer Fritz Freeling. Naturally, you would think if Warner wanted its iconic characters to keep succeeding, they would give their new contractors all the freedom to make the same wonderful, zany adventures they'd made before. You would be kidding yourself if you thought this. Due to budgetary restraints or other forms of just dickish executive meddling, DePatie and Freeling were prevented from using many of the classic characters of the past. Bugs Bunny? Sorry, Doc. Porky Pig? I don't think so. Foghorn Leghorn? I say, you must be joking, son. They were allowed so few of the old characters to use, it resulted in cartoons like, well, Speedy Gonzales having now Daffy Duck as an antagonist, and I said enough about that back in my worst storylines review. All that was bad enough, but the real capper was no longer having the one person who still might have cared enough to actually try and make something out of what little they had. That would be longtime Looney Tunes director Chuck Jones. While Tex Avery and Bob Clampett pretty much created the Looney Tunes characters we love, like Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, and Daffy Duck, it was Chuck Jones under Freeling's supervision who gave those characters the personalities we would come to know them for, as well as creating other such memorable characters like Yosemite Sam, Marvin the Martian, and of course, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Jones originally thought up the duo to be a terrible parody of the predator and prey cartoon genre he'd come to despise, but knew enough to run with the concept when it proved to be highly popular. However, a year before Warner closed down its studio, they fired Jones for breach of contract after discovering he'd been freelancing with United Productions of America to produce his own animated film, Gay Paris. Jones would then form his own studio and sign a deal to have MGM distribute his productions, which would include the TV special based on Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. So with no Bugs Bunny, no Chuck Jones, and barely any money, DePatie Freeling had to further outsource some of their productions to another studio, Format Films, who proceeded to give direction of the Looney Tunes shorts to Rudy Larriva, who had worked as an animator for Warner's in the 30s, but would ultimately do most of his work through the 60s with Disney and then the aforementioned United Productions of America. Larriva is a weird person to look back on, at least from a professional standpoint, in that he did have a long career in animation, and yet a lot of what he was involved in, at best, doesn't have the reputation of being extremely beloved classics. His work with Disney was in the 1940s, probably the lowest time for the company in Walt's lifetime, when they mostly made those short anthology movies like Make Mine Music and Melody Time. Not everything Larriva was a part of there is something Disney is really ashamed of. Well, with one exception. And again, you can't really blame Larriva specifically for a lot of those earlier works, since for most of them he was just one of multiple animators working under someone else's direction at the time. But that sadly cannot be said for the animated shorts he was hired to direct for DePatie Freeling and Warner under Format Films. So it's at last time to look at the series of Coyote and Roadrunner shorts that have since become infamously known as the Larriva 11. Now, I could look at all of these 11 shorts chronologically, but for reasons I'll get to soon, we're actually gonna start with the penultimate of the Larriva shorts, the Solid Tin Coyote. Is it over? Ah, damn it, I was having that dream again involving Jeannie and Sarah Michelle Gellar, and moving on! For the record, once I had rewatched The Solid Tin Coyote for this review, I immediately then rewatched the very first Coyote Roadrunner short ever made, Fast and Furious. My word, it was like the difference between night and day! The brightness of the animation and color would have been enough, but everything else, from how the music matched up to the action on screen, to the pacing of every single gag working to absolute perfection. This thing made me laugh, and that's something I haven't done a lot of lately. Fast and Furious, with a runtime of just over 7 minutes, has about 11 different segments with the Coyote trying to catch the Roadrunner. The Solid Tin Coyote has at most 7 such segments, with a total runtime that's just a minute less. And of course, the majority of them might as well have been bunched into one. Now, I want you to take all of that into account, everything that was wrong with that one short, and then consider this. The Solid Tin Coyote is believed by many to be the best of the Larriva cartoon shorts of the Coyote and Roadrunner! The actual first short made under Larriva was Run Run Sweet Roadrunner, which for the record, Larriva wrote in addition to directing. This one contained only 4 segments in 6 minutes. And half of those were centered around the same trap of Wile E disguising a lightning rod as a female Roadrunner. I followed this one up by watching the second Chuck Jones short, Beep Beep. This one had about 9 to 10 segments in just under 7 minutes. And just like the previous one I'd watched, they also were just paced absolutely brilliantly. The comedic timing of everything in that short was absolutely perfect. The second Larriva short, Tired and Feathered, breaks one of the most important rules of these cartoons in the second segment. Wile E sets a trap to try and crush the runner with a log, only for Roadrunner to spring the trap on him! Jones had specifically stated that the Roadrunner can never directly harm the Coyote. He always gets hurt by his own stupidity and arrogance. Even with the final short that Jones directed, War and Pieces, you could tell the production quality was lower than what you had seen before, and that Warner was already cutting back on its animation budget. But even then, they still put out far more effort than they would later on. There were 4 Coyote Roadrunner cartoons produced by the DePatie Freeling studio before Larriva took over, and even they, with their own limited production budget, still got the basic feel of the cartoons down for the most part. And yes, that includes the infamous Zip Zip Hooray, which not only had Wile E talking for the first time since his confrontation with Bugs in Operation Rabbit, but had him completely knock down the 4th wall to spend much of the short talking with 2 kids watching on TV about how tasty Roadrunners are, and The Wild Chase, which was a whole crossover with Sylvester and Speedy Gonzales. If I was to tell you what really kills the aesthetic of these cartoons, 2 things come to mind. First is the Coyote's own look. In the Jones shorts, they did try to make him look somewhat menacing, at least right up until he knows he's about to go off the cliff. In the Larriva shorts, the facial expressions he makes just look goofy. You know what it almost reminds me of? Fang Face, which, oh right, Larriva made as well. The second is the music. As I mentioned before, the older shorts and any and all music had a purpose, precisely choreographed to follow with the setting and the actions of the characters. In these, it's just background noise. But maybe worse than all that is how the newer cartoons usually conclude. Yes, rare was it in the Chuck Jones era that each segment of each short really had continuity with one another, but there always was something to suggest the last one had kind of a finality to it. The Larriva shorts, they almost always feel like they don't end, they just sort of stop. And when you consider that these shorts more frequently did try to have the segments be continuous, that just makes it even worse. The last of the Larriva cartoons was Clippity Clobbered, which just may have been the worst. Only 5 segments, and almost all of them centered around Wile E playing mad scientist, coming up with a bunch of crazy potions and chemicals that always backfire. But I will give this one credit for having it end on the Roadrunner actually waving goodbye to the audience before running off. Almost like everyone involved knew this series was finally being put to rest. Warner took back the actual production of the shorts in 1967 after merging with 7 Arts Productions, and the cartoons they would produce in the 2 years after that could be worthy of their own whole review video. They shuttered the animation department again in 1969 and really didn't get the Looney Tunes back on their feet until 10 years later when they made amends with Chuck Jones and brought him back now as an independent contractor. Meanwhile, DePatie Freeling was sold off to Marvel in 1981, and the studio did make some pretty impressive cartoons like Muppet Babies. Marvel was, of course, eventually bought by Disney, and as such, it's kind of a cluster crap now as to who owns what within the DePatie Freeling library. As for Larriva, well, in addition to becoming the director for Fangface, he also went on to help make cartoon shows such as Goldie Gold and Action Jack, the Punky Brewster cartoon, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Okay, I'll give him that one. But his Coyote Roadrunner work still deserves to be thrown off a cliff with an anvil attached to it. The Larriva 11 just may be the ultimate example of how studios just stopped caring about quality of cartoons by the 20th century's second half. There's simply no energy or passion in any of them. The creators were clearly going through the motions in making them, and as a result, it looks like the Coyote and Roadrunner are doing the same. It's like it's become a 9-to-5 job for them, which just makes it sadder when you remember Ralph Wolf and Sam Sheepdog did even that routine and made it funnier. If there is any good news, it's that Warner seems to have gotten the hint in later years. Even the new Looney Tunes shorts released on HBO Max, while they aren't as lengthy as the originals, still get the pacing and slapstick of the old cartoons down for the most part. At the very least, I'd recommend checking them out before anything from the Larriva 11. Unless you're looking for a cure for insomnia. You know, you forgot to make a proper send-off at the end of that video.
Yeah, I'll try to make up for it next time. Wait, what the frack?
Bye!
Hey, wait a minute!